about the famous Elvis Presley. We have to start by talking about producer Sam Phillips of Sun Records. Now, Sam Phillips was raised on an Alabama farm, and so he was surrounded by the sounds of black communities, including prominently Alabama blues. So he founded the Sun Record Company, moving to Tennessee, hoping to sort of elevate or popularize the blues music, particularly among white audiences, as he himself was a white man. And so this is when you get that quote that I read out earlier. Sam Phillips searching for a white man who would have some sense of the voice and musical style of black communities. And that way that artist could be marketed, could market the sounds of blues and of rhythm and blues to white audiences. And that man that he found was Elvis Presley. So Sam Phillips recorded Elvis Presley on July 5th, 1954, and a few days later played the record on air on Memphis's show Red Hot and Blue, which was a radio program. Now on this show, Phillips called in Presley to answer some interview questions because the popularity was just spiking. People were trying to listen in their cars or in storefronts to what person's voice could this possibly be. So on the air, Phillips asked Elvis Presley what high school he attended. Now, this is a subtle way of asking whether Elvis Presley is white or black, because in the segregated South, going to Elvis Presley's high school of Humes confirmed that Elvis Presley lived in and associated with white communities, that he himself was white. So it looked like Sam Phillips had found his voice, his spokesperson, a white face and a white man that could really repackage and popularize black musical styles. Now, like Sam Phillips, other DJs on the radio encourage cross-cultural exposure between white and black musical communities. So thinking about the ones that we looked at last week, that means you had country musicians that were cross-pollinating over the radio with rhythm and blues and gospel musicians that were then influencing white communities. So the radio was an invention that really allowed for this sonic integration, I think one of the articles from the first week called it, in a way that couldn't be stopped by Jim Crow laws or segregation laws. Now, Elvis Presley himself never would have claimed to have originated rock and roll or invented it. That was a mythology that arose through later revisionism, such as in the Rolling Stone magazine. In their 50th edition for the anniversary of the birth of rock and roll, they really painted Elvis Presley as the sole inventor and originator of rock and roll, with the event of Elvis Presley being on air with Red Hot and Blue really sparking the origins of that. But Alan Freed was already using the term rock and roll for rhythm and blues music before this event. Now, as for Elvis Presley's music, he was open about his gospel and blues influences, having grown up in Tupelo, Mississippi. So his sound, whenever he played, was considered too black for the Grand Ole Opry show in Nashville, but at the same time too white for blues stations. So he was caught in sort of this ambiguity concerning the racial identity of his sound. Now, Lloyd Price, who was another early 1950s rock and roll artist, said, "I knew Elvis. He did great things for the music. He never called himself the founder of rock and roll." So again, this is not something that Elvis would claim for himself, but others would on his behalf. But I think what this really points to is the idea of rock and roll as a movement that blended together black and white musical styles. Remember those streams that we looked at last week. And so it really doesn't make sense to me to point to a single originator, a single inventor of rock and roll, when it really was a movement that just emerged from the grassroots of all this cross-pollination, just what was in the air, especially in the South, between these black and white musical styles. Now, as Elvis's career was taking off, he was really known for his suggestive lyrics in his songs, suggestive poses, and dancing, particularly in his legs, while performing. So when he would perform on the television, they would tend to show only his upper body, so as not to show images of temptation to their viewers. And so he was very popular among teenage and young adult ladies as a result. Now, Elvis actually transitioned out of music and primarily into the silver screen, or into movie stardom. He was then drafted for 2 years of military service in the Army, and then upon returning, did a mixture of films with living life in seclusion, because he'd become so popular and easily recognizable on the street that anywhere he went, he would sort of face the celebrity fan treatment. So because of this, he tended to try to avoid being seen in public or avoid crowds, and eventually he died at age 42, relatively young, in his home.